All right. We are live to talk about here with the one and only Mr. David Osk, the concept of resilience, right? Should be no surprise as that is the expertise that we've landed on, especially identity-based resilience. But I saw an article, right? Something that came up in my news feed from Medium. It was written by a psychologist. Don't remember who wrote it, but it was asking, does failure, do struggles, does adversity just naturally lead to growth and resilience? And so the researcher went on to discuss, that it doesn't always lead to growth and resilience, and said that I would have had some rebuttals or some arguments against some of the conclusions he came to. So as a result of that, I wanted today to be able to come and bring up the issue. Why does failure and setbacks and rejection and struggles for some people produce growth and resilience? And why for others can they be stuck sometimes for years, even decades, right? With an injustice, with a trauma. And not to say they don't have compassion for that, right? I've worked with people that just can't seem to get over something really awful that's happened to them. And I have the tremendous compassion for what they're going through. But I think we all love to see, right, when someone is able to, and that's the reason why we created a resilience program. It's why we teach resilience training in corporations, why we do workshops and seminars on resilience, because there's something really inspiring and something incredibly powerful when someone can take a hurt, a pain, a setback, a failure, and they transform that, right, into just radical growth, and they start to really create, especially when that growth leads in a certain direction. So, Mr. David Osk, I believe you are a man that can speak to this subject very well. And I think both of us have experienced times where we felt stuck, right? Where we experienced a setback and rejection. It certainly didn't produce immediate resilience and growth.
No,
So,
I have never felt stuck. I am never down. It's funny. I think it's, as you were talking, I just Googled, once again, the word resilience and the definition to the capacity. I love that word, by the way, to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. And it's like, your feet are planted, you're withstanding, you're like, the tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, its leaf does not wither, right? And all that it does, it prospers. You're anchored, your roots are drawing from a deep well.
yeah.
And I love the analogy of withstanding, but also, to your point here, when we get knocked down, and sometimes, right, we hear stories, we've been through, seasons in life that are just awful.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know what? Unless you have a tether pulling you forward, unless you have an anchor that your soul has been dug into, you might not bounce back. You might not thrive. And some people, of course, end up dead, if we're just being honest about it, right? They don't bounce back. And so I think a strategy around resilience, understanding what's on the other side of that obstacle that's worth fighting for, and also what's on the, this side of the obstacle and who is worth fighting for. Is really important. It's multifaceted, it's complex, and what a great topic today. I need it.
Yeah. And I think the world in general, right? I mean, I've gotten a chance to meet with dozens and dozens of head of HR, CEOs, and what I'm hearing over and over again, right, is that we have a workforce that is consistently burnt out, right, that they are stressed, they are overwhelmed with anxiety and uncertainty and all these things, and you're seeing incredible rates of turnover. And I believe what obviously, the solution we're presenting is a need for resilience. But again, I think as you started to cover very nicely there, being resilient into what? That ideally that resilience leads you in a certain direction.
Yeah.
Sure, we love someone that can be tough, right? That just refuses to give up. We love stories, right? And there's incredible stories. I think the Rocky story, right? What made that thing so amazing is his just incredible tenacity and will to keep getting back up and try and defeat, whether it's Apollo Creed or, whoever it was in Rocky 1 through 15 or whatever. But what we are suggesting, we call it your true north. but that's defining those sets of values, right? Understanding a purpose, a passion, understanding your greatest strengths, and how to apply those in a way that has impact, that just you care so deeply about, right? That it almost has to come out of you. Knowing that the word passion comes from the root word of suffer, right? Something you're willing to suffer for. So that when you define those things, you're giving them specific language, and those act as a magnet to pull you forward in times when you are really, really stuck, right? When you're dealing, the thing with when you experience an adversity or an injustice or something really awful, like you're dealing with really primitive parts of the brain that are reacting to that. And those things, I've had sometimes people, when I ask the question, what are the things that you can control? Sometimes people will say, oh, I can control my feelings. I'm like, no, you can't.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah. And even if you could, I don't think that'd be particularly healthy. But your feelings fire so automatically, and the part of the brain, right, that responds rationally and responds out of your values, that's your prefrontal cortex. It's the newest part of the brain. It's the most evolved, but it also means that it takes the longest to kick in. And so that's why it's so important to really have strategies, to have clarity in place about the things that you're passionate about your values, about the role that you best serve in, that acts as a magnet to pull you out of tough times. Otherwise, right, that sense of injustice, that sense of feeling scared, being flooded with adrenaline, like those are powerful forces. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, you and I were talking earlier about, just this whole last week for me with some real curveballs in my business, and to the point where, I'm waking up at 3 in the morning and I'm not going back to sleep. Like it's some really tough stuff, and a lot of uncertainty around it, watching sales dip immediately, and just feeling, kind of helpless and so on. One of the things that I I love defining words because I think there's power in those things. And one of the things that you mentioned here a couple of times was true north, clarity, and so on. And I feel like this idea of, again, the comparison between magnetic north and true north, right? Magnetic north of the compass, you're going to get kind of close. Whereas true north is this plumb line where it's a concise and clear vocabulary that I like to say with all capital letters, that is just, these are my deepest convictions. These are the things that are worth fighting for. These are the things worth dying for. These are the things that I just really, really am passionate about in life, that mean a lot to me. And then also a vision of the future, that is born out of those values and those convictions that I feel, pulled toward. And so one of the things I think is really powerful is having that radical clarity around, the bedrock, as well as, kind of the vision forward. But then also you mentioned just grace and our feelings, and saying, hey, it's okay when the wind blows or you get, punched in the mouth, metaphorically or literally for that matter, to cry. To be like, man, this is hard. I feel the weight of this. I feel the uncertainty around it. Like, I love the word injustice, the injustice of it, and the attack or whatever that is. And you're like, man, and for me personally, I think for most of us, right, I'm always giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm always trying to help someone thrive as opposed to cheat my way to the top, which is, something I'm experiencing right now.
Yep.
And so I think it just helps so much to, as we're talking about this, to acknowledge the grace that's needed to feel and to just acknowledge something really is just difficult.
Yeah, you cover, as always, some really important points, right, to define. Like, so if we're looking at why some people seem to be resilient, they seem to grow from adversity versus why others don't, that concept of self-compassion and grace is so critical, right? It's probably, I think, a concept around resilience that's maybe not understood very well. But a lot of times, I work with highly driven type A's, very ambitious, and they have this false belief that when they make mistakes, that they fail at something, it's like they need to punish themselves, right? They need to hold themselves accountable, and there's no way that they're going to learn their lesson unless they're really hard on themselves. Interestingly, the research shows, right, that the harder and more punishing and critical you are of yourself, it actually increases the likelihood that you continue to make the same mistake, as opposed to when you offer yourself, self-compassion, and you're able, which I think is a tough thing to do, and to be able to cover and suggest how you practice self-compassion would probably need its own live stream.
Yeah.
But Kristen Neff, I think, does a phenomenal job. She's an expert in that field if someone's interested. But the ability to, right, kind of understand that we all make mistakes, that universal sense of just the humanity, right, that we all have, being able to have a growth mindset that making mistakes, failing, like that's an important part in the pathway to success. Those things are critical if you want to have a repeatable framework for building resilience and growing from struggles.
Yeah. So so kind of to repaint the picture, of our topic here, right? Does hardship and resistance and, the kind of the punches of life, does that cause resilience? Does it stop it? And I think really it's, we have to not only we got to have a couple of things going on here, is a self-assessment, right? Some self-awareness.
Yeah.
Do I want to grow?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It's almost like the biblical question of, do you want to be well? Am I in a growth mindset here, or am I, I don't want to paint a miss kind of a picture, but am I having a pity party here? And I'm comfortable just playing a victim here.
Yep.
Or did I just take a really hard shot in the stomach and I'm out of wind and I need a support system to help me not only get back on the horse, but just to, hold my head up and see forward. So I think there's some questions that need to be asked, of ourselves, right? In that kind of that quiet place inside of us, to build some self-awareness around, what's really happening right now in this moment. What do I need? What's that strategy, or the self-awareness? And then what's the strategy, which again is multifaceted to make progress.
Yeah. I think that the part that around the victimhood thinking, right? I'm sure nobody, wants to say, yes, I want to be a victim. That's exactly what I want. But the powers in the kind of internal, again, that injustice part of the brain that tends to produce that type of thinking is really powerful. Yep. And there's something almost intoxicating, right, about feeling when you have the moral high ground, the sense of righteousness. I've been wronged, right? Yep. This person did this, or this happened to me, and I have this moral high ground. I mean, I've talked to some experts that are mentors to me, and we've talked about this dynamic. And I think even their own awareness sometimes of how they do that in their marriage or in different places, they're like, yeah, as you say that, I am aware that there is something, right? I kind of take some sense of solace, right? I feel good, right, when I feel like I've been wronged because of that moral righteousness. And so, I don't think anyone sets out to do that intentionally, but I think it can be difficult to get out of, because that can it can feel empowering in a weird way.
Yeah. No kidding. I think that's something, honestly, that sneaks up on me particularly, like that kind of that victim mindset, and it removes that, as you say, the inner locus of control. Yeah. It takes away something where, you feel a bit helpless, and the pity party, woe is me, all that kind of stuff. And what's funny is again, that the self-awareness piece, sometimes I don't even realize that I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'll go for days feeling powerless, feeling like a victim, and kind of give away the keys to the kingdom, give away the keys to the car, take my foot off the accelerator, take off my boxing gloves, and, put my shield down and throw my sword in the lake. It's like, it's amazing how you tend to become just less than. You start to shrink. That uncertainty, sets in. And I'm just gonna share a quick story. So, yesterday, right, you were on the call with our mastermind group, and I'll make it real fast here, but I hopped on that call, just started sharing some things that I'm dealing with. And what was so fascinating is within just a few minutes, you jumped in and said, hey man, I love you. Like you're just an awesome friend. And you started reminding me, who I was. But then you asked me, David, who are you? And I'll be honest, Andy, it was like my spine straightened up because what? I had forgotten. And in that moment of, a few days of cortisol and fighting, talking to lawyers and all kinds of nonsense, right? I mean, it just that the cortisol, adrenaline, kind of just started causing my mind, my heart just to shrink and
Yeah,
stop thinking, clearly. And so it was really fascinating how just in a moment having someone step into my world, right? Part of that strategy, and just start asking some questions and pouring in and inspiring, right? Breathing life into. Man, I woke up today feeling like a different person. And not that it's, again, not a utopia, right?
yeah,
But compared to the last few days and feeling like, got white knuckling it to, okay, I got this. I'm just the man for the job. Let's go.
that's right.
A big shift.
It really is amazing how when you experience something that knocks you off of kind of your footing, that it does get you to start to question, right? It's like you lose your sense, you lose your orientation
Yeah.
about who you are, recognizing that like, hey, I've been through tough times before, remembering I've got skills and tools, I've got support systems, right? You forget who you are, right? I think a lot of times it brings up a feeling of shame, right? Where that shame starts to feel like I'm inadequate, right? There's something about this where I'm now questioning who I am, right? Not just feeling a little scared, but I'm questioning whether I'm worthy. I'm questioning whether I've got what it takes,
Yeah.
and that can be very debilitating, right? And so I think having someone in your corner or having the right set of questions to help reorient you so that you can I think of David and Goliath sometimes, right? And someone that accessed real-time resilience. David, as he went to go fight this massive, terrifying, must have been terrifying, right? Goliath out there beating his chest saying, who's ready to take me on? And David, this little runt, right? This the least likely guy to go out there and fight Goliath, says, I'm just the man for this job. Because he realized that God had been building inside him this whole time the exact set of tools, right? Both his ability to use a slingshot, but also it was the character, right? The courage that he had developed, the trust and dependence on God. And so when, Goliath and everybody else, as I'm sure, like, just don't make contact with Goliath, right? All the other soldiers, don't let him look at me. Here's little David. And even when he said he'd fight them, the king and his brothers came up and they tried to say they believed, right, that this is what a soldier looks like. And they tried to put in, on him the uniform and the sword. And if he didn't know who he was in that moment, if he had questioned, right, whether or not he had the ability, he would have gotten slayed. But I
Yeah.
think that's something, right, for all of us. Like, we go back to that true north concept. The beauty of it is because it's a fixed location, right? We're not reading and reacting in the midst of being flooded with adrenaline, right? Trying to read and react when you're flooded with uncertainty and fear and shame is just a recipe for failure, right? It's just not going to go well. But when you've predetermined, even when you're flooded with cortisol, right? Especially when you've got, we call them memory darts, little tools that we help our clients be able to utilize. You can be flooded with anxiety and adrenaline and very quickly access tools that help remind you, oh, that's not right. Wait a minute. I've got a slingshot. I've got, courage. I've got, people over here that are ready to have my back. And it's amazing the difference of what that can create in you.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And here's the interesting thing, right? The words you brought this up, Zakar, one who remembers. It's a funny thing. What if you had nothing to remember though? What if you hadn't predetermined? Then there's nothing to go back to. So if you haven't established those things with radical clarity, if you haven't gone through the progression of answering those questions, of course, that are in your course, then there's nothing to remember. There's nothing to course correct to. And so I think it's really, really important. It's vital that one has established those things in advance so that, they know where and what the plumb line is, and who it is ultimately, right?
Yeah.
It's your soul. So I think that, having the established plumb line, having predetermined, when the wind blows, right, then it's not just, oh my gosh, I'm pulling my hair out. You might feel that way for a short time because you're human, because I'm human, right? I felt like that for a short time because I'm
Oh,
human.
yeah.
At
It's
the same
natural.
time, it lasted for, hours or days, as opposed to what might have been a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of people in this world that have absolutely zero
Oh yeah.
bedrock established. And every single day they're getting up in the morning, just wondering, how am I going to white knuckle it through this day? How
Yeah.
am I going to love my spouse? What values am I bringing to them? What values am I trying to instill in my children? What am
So
I,
good.
all that stuff. Um, I think the proof is in the pudding, right? Where we see a world at war, not only with one another, but a world at war with
Within
themselves.
itself. Yeah. 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 So agree. And love, I think, to kind of even summarize a few of the things that I think we've covered in regards to, the difference between people that are able to grow and really demonstrate radical resilience in the midst of suffering and struggling, right? Some of the things we've talked about is having a clear understanding of what points true north for you and being resilient towards that, right? It really creates this beautiful, mutually beneficial, right? That when you're being resilient towards something that has great purpose and great emotional significance to you, right, you're just going to persist and persevere, and you're going to do everything you can to overcome difficulty. And then when you're operating in true north, it naturally creates its own resilience too. So it kind of has this upward virtuous cycle when you're pointing true north. We talked about self-compassion, right, and the ability to not be so harsh and judgmental and critical. Probably forgiveness, right, the ability to forgive and let go towards others. And that's tricky. Again, that could use its own live stream, probably a whole series of them. I think talking about forgiveness with clients when they've been wronged and how they're holding on to whether it's a resentment or an injustice, like that has been one of the trickiest things in the coaching that I've done. Even the guy who I think is one of the authorities in the field of psychology of forgiveness, he
Right.
only developed that expertise because he had been wronged by his brother, Fred Luskin, and he carried along with him this tremendous resentment, so much so that it was poisoning him from the inside. And his wife, 10 years after the injustice, said, "You need to go and forgive your brother or figure this out because I'm going to leave you otherwise," right? It's poisoning the marriage at this point. And so he realized there wasn't necessarily a good model for practicing forgiveness. And anyways, so I think that's an important concept in consistently being resilient, having a support system. Am I leaving interlopes of control?
Yeah, real quick, I want to make a comment on the forgiveness portion of things. What I think is fascinating is the when someone has done the work of being resilient, when they've just even tried, to understand it, when they've tried to do hard things, right? They've entered into that arena and establishing and deciding, I'm going to act from a virtuous and courageous and kind place, and I'm going to help others around me do the same thing. What's fascinating is they realize it can be really difficult because our knee-jerk reactions, right, that are kind of built in from day one in a broken world, is it's me over you. You bite me, I'm biting back 10 times harder.
Yep.
And it's this tit for tat, immature, destructive place to live. But when someone decides I'm going to enter into these waters and drink from a deeper well and act in a kingly, right, in a queenly, manner in this life, we realize it's really, really challenging. It's difficult. Therefore, grace is way more appreciated. It's way more highly valued. We tend to show grace to one another because we realize, how difficult it is. So that when we see someone trying, when we see them just showing some effort at all about living in a courageous and virtuous manner, man, I'm willing to show someone like that grace all day long, as opposed to someone who is not doing that, right? If they're just kind of generally a taker and it's me, and me over you kind of thing. So I think that the maturity piece there in understanding grace and kindness is born out of the effort that one puts into their own journey.
For sure. Yeah, I think well stated, and right, does really require, I think, a commitment to going deeper and living out of a more secure foundation of identity, of having, really healthy social connections. We talked about, the before the call, before we started this, that suffering and struggles and failures and setbacks, like those are inevitable, right? Like you're going to experience those in life. There's no pathway, certainly no pathway in which you want to experience success and happiness that doesn't involve, right, failures and struggles. The thing is that they're actually can be very good for us. However, while those are inevitable, like the persistence of suffering, that is optional, right?
Right.
There is the ability to suffer well. There is the ability, right, to extract the greatest value out of each struggle. And so that each one leads to greater wisdom, getting stronger, getting better, right? Kind of a process of perpetual growth and improvement. Like that is a possible pathway, right? And it's a learnable skill. I think there's some people that just naturally do seem to have resilience from an early age, right? But I'd say that's rare. But regardless of where you start off, I was a fragile kid, right? I mean, I was definitely, my emotions I wore on my sleeve. I couldn't hide them. They were so intense, right? I would strike out in baseball and I was like doing everything I could to fight, right? The crying back to the dugout. And I was a good player, right? But I just was so emotional and I felt so embarrassed and exposed when I would strike out, right? And so I was definitely one of those fragile kids that had to learn resilience as I got older because I got sick of feeling beat up all the time.
I love this point. I remember, I guess it's 5 years ago this month, my brother-in-law Victor died, and that was, we've had some grandparents die. That was, those were really hard seasons. At the same time, when you lose somebody who's in their 40s, who's just like one of the best people, that's the atomic bomb. So our family's been really rocked by that. But one thing that I learned out of that, we often hear the term, somebody says, good grief, like an expletive. Well, that term came because there is such thing as good grief. That term is literally because someone entered into grief knowing that they were going to get to the other side of grief and pull as much good as they possibly could out of it. And it's I forget who kind of explained that to me, but it's a fascinating thing. For instance, as an example in grief and being resilient, one could choose to just crumble, and I've actually seen people do that where they cease to exist. They just literally fall apart. And at the same time, you can still have massive grief, but when there's thanksgiving in it, thankfulness in it,
right?
And while you're grieving, while you're wailing, while you're screaming, you're remembering, the beauty and the good and the courage and the laughter and the love. That to me is a good grieving process.
Yeah.
You're not isolating those two things. You're mixing them together and drinking that cup, with courage and acknowledging, both the hardship as well as, the love and the steadfastness and the strength and the beauty and all those things that were woven into that person. And here's something else. And I'll, Andy, a little bit deeper on the, on the kind of the philosophy end of things, right? You always say the word authenticity comes from the word author.
That's right.
Right. And what's fascinating is when you've predetermined and established those things, back to the example of grief, we're riding the sunbeam to the sun, as C.S. Lewis says. It's not this dead-ended, hey, he was a great guy. It's like, what sort of a being could make someone like this, that would cause me in their absence to lay on the ground and cry so hard that I'm sweating through my jeans. I'm sweating through a flannel shirt, right? Like what type of there's mystery in it. There's angst in it, but honestly, there's glory in the mystery. It's like, what sort of a being could create someone just so awesome that I would grieve this much? Could there be something on the other side that's worth entering into and fighting for and so on? Of course it is, right? The sorrow and the grieving points us forward. And I think that being someone who sees that is the person that I want to be, and I want to
Yeah.
help other people become that type of a resilient person. They're acknowledging with all authenticity that something is incredibly hard, but yet there's something so good in it at the same time.
Whew. I'd never heard that story about the good grief. And that's really extremely powerful. And it really does get to, right? Even with the sense of the author, that there is a greater, story that is written in and for us. And that's such an important part of resilience too, is the meaning that you assign to the hardships you experience.
And isn't
Right.
that great? You get to assign meaning to it,
It,
and you get to believe it with all your heart.
yeah.
And it's, yes, I love that.
There's a well-known exercise. It's called a benefit finding exercise. I don't know that it's the best particular name for it, but it's in the literature around post-traumatic growth, right? This exercise is one of the ones that really illustrated the capacity for trauma to be turned into growth, right? And so I think first time I heard about it was as soldiers who had experienced trauma in war or at some point in active duty. Were trying to figure out how to help these soldiers so that they didn't just go down the pathway of PTSD and how debilitating that can be. And so they would have them actually write about what they experienced, right? Acknowledge the feelings and try and have some pathway on how to deal with those, right? That you can't bypass that process a lot of times. But then to write down, is there some way in which what you've gone through, which is admittedly horrific, right? But is there some way that you could actually benefit and learn or grow from this? And as the soldiers were able to start to identify, well, yeah, I suppose I could become more courageous, right? I suppose that there's a lot of my brothers and sisters out there, right, that have gone through the same, and I could go and help them out. They started the pathway, right? They started to give themselves closure over the grief, right? Part of it, like we don't do well when we don't have closure, when we've experienced a hardship,
Yeah.
right? And we feel like it's not resolved. We'll play it on a record, right? And
Yeah.
we'll just play it over and over again. We'll ruminate on it. So you're literally giving yourself closure, but you're doing it in a way that's empowering, right? That leads to, I'm going to choose, and this is going to make me stronger, better, more courageous, but you're giving it a specific narration, right? A specific kind of ending. And then it's leading to a higher purpose. And I'm going to use this to better and help and serve other people. That is such a powerful, that is something that honestly we should all be doing every time that we experience something significantly traumatic, painful, difficult. If we can give ourselves the gift of creating a narration, a meaning to it, right, that leads to growth, that also allows us to better serve the people and causes that we care about, that will make you radically resilient, right? And that's why we use the term radically resilient. It literally comes out of the foundation and core of who you are.
I love that. And I want to go back, well said, by the way, I want to go back to that, when you're leaning in, even just stumbling forward in these areas, it makes you a more kind and compassionate person for those around you that are stumbling forward just like you are. Because quite often that's all it seems like. I'm just, even this week, I just feel like I'm completely stumbling. But what's fascinating is, what? I'm getting a little bit on the other side. And not that there's necessarily resolution, but at the same time, I'm feeling, all right, I got over the kind of the initial shock of some things, that kind of stuff. Thankfully, I was surrounded by guys who are leaning in and stumbling forward, who are very gracious and eager to help, lift me up, that kind of stuff, and remind me. And, because we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And, when that internal space kind of quieted down and I was able to kind of, focus a little bit and start, remembering, right. And writing a little bit, which is always helpful. It's amazing what can shift. Just the strategy in and of itself has to be clear, let alone the bedrock in which you're standing upon. It's sometimes we feel like we're racing down the road in a Ferrari, and sometimes it's a little John boat, and each one of those things can break in a different way. Whether it's a leak in the boat or a flat tire or rain or snow or whatever it is, and it's so each situation is different, each season of life is different, and we have to have a multifaceted strategy to anchor back to that plumb line.
Yeah. So well said. And I love it. I think we've covered a good chunk of the variables, right, that produce resilience. So if you want to know why, sometimes growth or adversity or suffering leads to resilience and growth, and other times it doesn't, right? And that social component, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but in specific, I want to say, right, you covered the need to be around people that do offer compassion, understanding, grace. to be around people that are gritty, right? To be around other people that practice resilience. Because you can surround yourself with people and say, well, I've got a support system. But if you're surrounded by people, right, who frequently complain, who don't really, think about or try and offer solutions, who being around them actually robs you of resilience. And there's people, right? I mean, there's terms out there, emotional vampires. There's like all these terms out there. That
I've never heard that, but I like that.
So like,
Gosh.
if grit, if resilience, if being anti-fragile is something you desire, and if you want to be happy, you want to be successful, you want to be healthy, then you should desire it, right? These are the variables that we know are the most important variables to producing these outcomes.
Yeah.
Then you want to be in a community and surround yourself with people that also value those things and practice those things. So
well said. Well said. I'm such a great topic. And I want to say too is, from the whatever here 35 minutes and 47 seconds, right? I feel like even just talking about these things, it causes me to be more resilient, right? It fills that side of your spirit that just needs a bit more courage. So I would encourage you, if you're listening, to reach out if you need help in this area, if your company needs help. Everybody, your entire life, your success financially and otherwise, relationally, will skyrocket when you start building on the real foundation and not some plaque on the wall that you're hoping everybody subscribes to. Everybody has to have their own plumb line, their own definition of what that established place is that they're anchoring back to and operate from, as opposed to looking for something.
Yeah. Love that. And I know, having started some work and gotten a chance to go in and kind of teach some of these resilience principles, not only does it help produce, greater revenue, productivity goes up, burnout goes down, right? You see less turnover. You see all these things that as a business owner that you should care about. But some of the business owners that I've talked to said, in addition to like, I really care about my employees, and what I love is that, yes, I'm seeing them demonstrate the ability to bounce back quicker, and not just bounce back quicker, but bounce back better, right? Where they're able to rebound from this and then get into flow state, and they're getting more done and they're enjoying it more. But I also know that they're starting to share stories of how they're using the same skills and techniques that you're teaching here, right? In the boardroom or the organization or whatever, right? But they're practicing these in their marriage. They're practicing these in their personal lives. And so it's benefiting them there. And a happier employee is a more productive, right? We know happier employees tend to perform better.
Yeah.
And so it really, I think it's a very gratifying thing, because resilience is such a pivotal skill. I mean, it's arguably the most important skill set, maybe outside of self-awareness, right? The ability to first name the true, that's why we do the true north first, and then practice the resilience. Yeah. But it's such a critical skill and tool. And even if someone's like, this really does sound interesting, if we've got so many resources. We've written a white paper. We've got a variety of different exercises and things like that. I mean, if we could help, one person a day to become more resilient, I mean, that would be just a massive source of gratification for us. Please reach out.
Yeah, great.
Mr. David Osk, any last words?
No, I just want to thank you for following your convictions in life, and bringing to bear not only your experiences and coming through some really hard stuff, but then also, sticking with a doctorate and understanding, on a very physical, level, how the mind and brain and body work together, that kind of stuff. But then distilling these things down in a way that is really easy for, whether it's a CEO or an 8th grader to establish. It's, I look back, Andy, and I think, what would have my life look like if I would have had real certainty on this in my teen years? Yeah. Let alone, running a business and helping entrepreneurs grow, that kind of thing. It's, life would be, I don't know, just a bit better, a lot better.
Well, I appreciate that, and just appreciate getting to have gone on this journey, with you along this way, and the people we've helped, right? I mean, there's a lot of people out there that I know their lives are significantly transformed as a byproduct of the work that you've done and we've done. So, all right. Have a great